Starting off at number 20, I'm going with Andy Lee's knockout over John Jackson. John Jackson is the son of Julian Jackson, arguably the hardest pound-for-pound puncher of all time. And in this instance, John himself was looking just as dangerous, dropping Andy Lee and putting on a serious beating. He continued to press the action and put Lee in serious trouble, nearly getting him out of there when he knocked him through the ropes. But as Lee's legs were wobbling and he backed up against the ropes, it gave him the perfect opportunity to land a sneaky hook against the overeager Jackson. Within a split second, the hunter had become the hunted, and it furthermore cements the fact that your opponent is always dangerous. And the right hook would become a trademark punch for Andy Lee, fighting Matt Koroboff for the middleweight title in his next fight and using that punch to win. At number 19, I'm going to go for Wilfred Benitez's knockout over Maurice Hope. Benitez is one of the slickest fighters of all time and one of the greats of the 70s and 80s. He was just 23 in this fight and would win his world title in his third different weight division. The timing, technique and delivery of this punch is just perfect. It's a beautiful right-hander set up by a feint, and the results are just devastating. And watching Benitez coolly shrug off the fact that he's just knocked his opponent out is just the icing on the cake. Benitez was a truly excellent fighter who astonishingly won his first world title at just 17 years old. At number 18, I'm going with the first body shot knockout in this list, and it was thrown by one of the best body punchers boxing's ever seen, Irish Mickey Ward. Ward was on the comeback trail and had won a streak of fights, but hadn't been in with someone as good as Alfonso Sanchez for a long time. In truth, this fight was make or break for Ward, who was seemingly put in as a stepping stone for the hard-punching undefeated Sanchez. And for 6.5 rounds, the fight was panning out that way, with Sanchez dishing out a brutal one-sided beating. In fact, he was dominating this fight so badly that the commentators were calling for it to be stopped. But along with his signature left hook to the body, Ward's biggest strength was his toughness, grit and resilience, and in round 7 he found success with a left hook to the head followed with a body shot. Seconds later, he would immediately follow it up with the same combination, this time throwing it with more spite, instantly dropping Sanchez on the floor. Sanchez was counted out and his career would never really recover from this, as he never found the same heights again, whereas Mickey Ward went on to have some of the most legendary fights of all time against Arturo Gatti and Emmanuel Augustus. Next up, we're going with Matthew Saad Muhammad's beautiful uppercut over Lottie Moali. Saad Muhammad is one of the great light heavyweights that never really gets mentioned nowadays. I think he's one of the most underrated fighters going. And it's just the absolutely brutal delivery of this uppercut that puts it in this list for me. Moali was a durable boxer who had even started this fight well, but he just happened to be on the receiving end of one of the most brutal uppercuts ever thrown. Next up, we're going with one of boxing's greatest ever fighters, Sugar Ray Leonard. In my opinion, one of the most underrated aspects of his game was his spite. Ray could do everything in the ring, whether it was boxing on the back foot or having the grit and determination to fight up close. But when he had an opponent hurt, he truly was a killer in the ring and always went for the finish, usually getting it. Having recently won the world title against the great Wilfred Benitez, Leonard was in incredible form and completely outclassed Davey Boy Green, landing this devastating combination. At number 15, I'm going with Gervonta Davis's brutal uppercut against the extremely aggressive Leo Santa Cruz. Although you can make a case that Santa Cruz was slightly past his best during this fight, he was still a dangerous opponent who was extremely durable. He'd even started the fight well, but as he threw that right hand, Davis started timing him for the left uppercut. As Davis started to apply the pressure in the corner, he landed one of the most brutal uppercuts I've ever seen. The timing, speed and power of this punch is perfect and the effects are devastating, and it's one of the best knockouts I've seen in recent years. Now moving on, I'm going to go with Mike Tyson, and there's 3 of Tyson's knockouts which I can't split. Firstly, for domination and demolition, it's his knockout over Marvis Fraser, but I think his greatest knockout, considering the opposition, is against Mike Spinks. Spinks was a legitimate Hall of Famer, an undisputed light heavyweight champion and a heavyweight champion, and Tyson just blitzed him away in 90 seconds. But on a technical level, my favourite Tyson knockout is his left hook against Carl Williams. I just love the way he slips so effortlessly and lands this shot with all his body weight twisted through completely clean, sending Williams flying into the ropes. This is just Tyson at his absolute peak with his freakish genetics and excellent timing and speed. Now for number 13, we're going to stick with the heavyweights, and for this one I'm going for 2 knockouts that are extremely similar and potentially the most brutal on this list. Firstly, I'm going to cover David Tua's instant demolition of John Ruiz. It was a leaping left hook that caused the damage from Tua, but whilst Ruiz was defenceless against the ropes, Tua unloaded a violent combination which knocked him out, which is eerily similar to Ray Mercer's vicious combinations against the defenceless Tommy Morrison. With Morrison out cold on his feet and Mercer still landed devastating shots, these 2 knockouts have to be the most vicious and potentially unnecessary knockouts ever seen. And now moving on to Lennox Lewis's revenge knockout over Hasim Rahman. Lewis was the full package, with one of the greatest resumes ever compiled in heavyweight history. But having taken Rackman lightly in their first fight and been on the end of a devastating knockout himself, he evened the score with an absolutely perfect right hook. Julian Jackson is considered by many as being the hardest puncher ever, but in his fight against Harold Graham, he was being convincingly outboxed and his eye was beginning to completely swell up. Graham, who would never go on to win a world title, was boxing so well that he was on the verge of stopping Jackson. But whilst backing Jackson up, he left his chin in the air and walked into one of the most destructive right hands ever thrown. He dramatically fell to the floor as soon as the shot landed and laid stiff, with his world title dreams over. In his prime, Manny Pacquiao was one of the most mesmerising aggressive fighters ever seen. A brilliant attacking phenomenon, with knockout wins over much bigger and durable men. But it was this left hand against Ricky Hatton which was his most impactful. This is when Manny really cemented himself as the pound-for-pound star, scoring one of the most brutal knockouts of the decade. And just 1 year later, Sergio Martinez would land another devastating left hand from the southpaw stance. This was a rematch against the elite level Paul Williams after an extremely competitive first fight that went the distance. Williams was not only very skillful, but he was also durable, and this fight looked like it was going to be a great fight from the start. But the action would be drastically ended in just round 2 when Martinez unloaded this incredible left hand. Joe Louis is revered by the illustrious Ring magazine as the hardest punching boxer ever seen. And it's consistently brutal knockouts like this which are the reason why. This combination was unloaded against Billy Conn in their rematch, and it's just a perfect display of technical excellence. After throwing the 1-2 and being smothered, he takes a step back to create space, throws a perfect right uppercut and left hook combination, and his balance allows him to stay in position after he's thrown. Joe's balance was phenomenal, and it allowed him to twist his entire body weight through the shots and throw other shots from them. He never wasted anything with his technique, throwing short, crisp punches with maximum power. Now, it's universally regarded that Sugar Ray Robinson is the greatest fighter of all time. A man who could do everything in the ring on the front foot and back foot, with a collection of beautiful knockouts against Hall of Famers. Now, there's nothing flashy about this left hook, and if you blink you'll miss it, but it's considered the greatest punch ever thrown. Considering Robinson's on the back foot, and it looks like there's very little power in the punch, and it's thrown against one of the toughest fighters of all time in Gene Fullmer, it really is outstanding the devastating effects that this punch had. But Robinson was also capable of the flashy stuff too. Blessed with some of the fastest and most precise hands ever seen, this combination against Rocky Graziano is just beautiful. Every single punch is delivered with pinpoint accuracy, with the final right hand not only sending Graziano to the canvas, but also his mouthguard out of the ring. Now, you can't make a greatest knockout list without mentioning George Foreman once or twice, and here I'm going to go through multiple knockouts of his. Firstly, although I don't consider it his greatest knockout, his walking left uppercut over Jerry Cooney is my favourite. He's walking with such poise that he could just be strolling through the park, and the way the punch is just delivered so coolly under pressure and sends Cooney crumbling to the canvas is excellent. And then of course there's his legendary knockout over Michael Moore. A simple 1-2 that doesn't even look that heavy, that cements George as the oldest heavyweight champion in history. And this was multiple decades removed from his prime. At the age of 46, almost 20 years after he was destroying the likes of Ken Norton. Norton was an excellent fighter who gave Muhammad Ali fits across a brutal trilogy. But Foreman made easy work of Norton and fellow Ali foe Joe Frazier. Frazier's toughness was the stuff of legend, but he was no match for Big George and a stylistic nightmare for Frazier. Foreman would knock Frazier out twice, but in their first fight, he would drop him a total of 6 times in just 2 rounds. Whilst we're staying on the subject of heavyweight knockout artists, next up is the legendary Rocky Marciano, the only heavyweight champion to retire with a perfect undefeated record. Marciano was hurt and dropped early by Jersey Joe Walcott, who remained an elusive target and boxed beautifully, earning a major lead on the scorecards over 13 rounds. But Rocky dug deep and persisted, and finally found the perfect right hand to score the knockout. As the pair traded right hands, it was Marciano's shorter punch that landed first, causing hellacious damage and winning Marciano the heavyweight title that he would become so legendary for never losing. Now, we've already mentioned what a great attacking fighter Manny Pacquiao was in this list. When you fight with such an aggressive style, it always comes with huge risk, especially when you're fighting against top-level opposition. And in his brilliant 4th and final fight against bitter rival Juan Manuel Marquez, this would prove to be the case. Both fighters had dropped one another previously in this firefight, but it was Manny who seemed to be doing more of the damage. And as he had Marquez hurt on the back foot, he lunged in and was caught with one of the most brutal right hands of the decade. But this was by no means a fluke, and was actually a punch that Marquez was setting up and had success with earlier in the fight. But when it comes to right hands, there's been no greater punch thrown than Tommy Hearns over Roberto Duran. In over 100 fights as a professional boxer, with many at the top level against legends, this was the only fight in which Roberto Duran was ever knocked out cold. Hearns' aggression and all-time great power was just a nightmare for Roberto Duran in a brutal 2-round beatdown. But it's the violence of the knockout punch that makes this one so iconic. The right hand is thrown with so much spiteful snap that you don't even see it coming. The noise it makes sounds like the cracking of Duran's chin, and it just completely wipes him out instantly. It truly is one of the greatest knockouts of all time, especially considering as what Duran had already done and what he would go on to do as a great fighter. And now, as we get to the very top of my favourite knockouts, I'm going to go with Jersey Joe Walcott's legendary walking uppercut against Cesar Charles. Not only is this an extremely cool and well-placed uppercut, you have to take into context who it's landed against. Jersey Joe Walcott had been around for years and had never won a title despite fighting so many great fighters. He'd already been beaten multiple times by Cesar Charles, and Cesar Charles is considered by many as one of the 10 greatest fighters of all time. To finally win the heavyweight title at a record-breaking age at the time against one of the greatest fighters ever seen, with one of the greatest punches ever seen, it's just the perfect way to do it. And at number 1 spot, my favourite knockout of all time is Derek Jefferson's brutal left hook against Maurice Harris. Now this is just one of the hardest punches I've ever seen land, and it was a really fun fight leading up to this. Both fighters were slugging and had been dropped leading up to this one, but it was Jefferson who was looking worse for wear as Harris unloaded big powerful shots. And as Jefferson looked like he could be on his way out, as he leant to the side, he put his entire body weight through his left hook, completely sending Harris stiff and knocking his mouthpiece flying into the crowd. And it's just the brutal ebb and flow of this fight and delivery of this punch that makes it my favourite knockout of all time. And those are my 20 favourite knockouts of all time. There's a few more in there, as in certain instances I couldn't split them. Now this video isn't necessarily covering the greatest knockouts of all time, just my favourites. Let me know what your favourite knockout ever is in the comment section below.